Swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and placed, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Argumentation essays are really the standard for academic writing. Now, we teach you about other kinds of essays like narrative, cause and effect, description, expository. There are all sorts of other types of modes of essays. But ultimately, everything leads to the argumentative essay or argumentation essay. And often when you get to the end of a class, you'll find that that is the final assignment for the class, is to write an argumentation essay. Now, you'll notice I'm using argumentative and argumentation, both terms interchangeably. I actually prefer the term argumentation. A lot of books prefer the term argumentative. My reason for preferring argumentation over argumentative is simply I think argumentative sounds like it's a quarrel, an angry, which is not the tone of an argumentation essay. And so I think for beginning writers, sometimes they can be confused by that and think, oh, I need to take an angry position, when in fact most argumentation essays are conversations really between experts about subjects that they agree on and they respect one another on, but that they need to take a different position on and try to persuade the other person. Okay, so argumentation essays tend to fail for a couple of reasons. One reason is sometimes the thesis is so weak that it's just a fact, right? So, for example, a student might write, Hamlet is a play about a man who is trying to decide whether he should kill his uncle to avenge his father. Well, that's just a fact. Any reasonable person would agree with that. In fact, if you said to someone, that's not true, their response would be, I think you didn't read Hamlet. Like, that is definitely true. The other mistake people make is to do an opinion. An opinion is something which is not a fact, however, you could not persuade someone of. Right? So, for example, if I said Hamlet is Shakespeare's best play, well, if you don't think it's his best play, if you think King Lear is, or The Tempest, or Henry IV, Part 1, or whatever, if you think something else is his best play, I can't persuade you of that because that's simply a matter of opinion and personal taste. But an argument would be something that isn't obvious to people, but I could persuade you of with evidence. So, for example, I might make an argument that Hamlet is best read as as a story about someone who has failed to come into manhood and is still being controlled by his father even after death. And that's not obvious from the beginning, but I would start to offer evidence. Like, for example, I would point out, listen, when Hamlet's father dies, the person who should be the king is Hamlet. And so Hamlet's upset because his uncle usurped his father's throne, but why isn't Hamlet upset because his uncle stole his throne? Hamlet's just going to go back to school. He's still not married at his age. He is supposed to be the Prince of Denmark. And as far as we can tell, he's doing nothing to help his people. And now his father is dead and he's still being bossed around by his father's ghost and trying to decide what to do about his surrogate father figure instead of being a man himself. Now, you might still disagree with this position that I'm taking, but at this point, I've offered enough evidence from the text that you would say, like, okay, I can see that. I think I can buy that. Like, I might still disagree with you, but I think that's a valid position. That's an argument. Okay. All right. So how do I make sure that my argument is not just an opinion, but it's also not just a fact, but it is truly an argument? Well, an argument has to have other sides, at least one other side. Now, sometimes students will simplify it and act like there's only two sides. Sometimes there's 4 sides or 5 sides or 7 sides, but you want to take one position, okay? The best position, whatever you think that is. But for the sake of describing this to you in simplicity, I'm going to just talk as if there are only 2 sides to something. So how do I make sure that I have the strongest possible one? Well, I would recommend that you use a method in logic and reason that's called the steel man, S-T-E-E-L, the steel man. Now, what's the steel man? Well, it's actually something that we use in opposition to the straw man fallacy. And the way the straw man works is sometimes if you're arguing with someone, sometimes when you're describing their position, you describe it in a way that is unfair or is weak, or that they will immediately say like, that's not what I said. That's not what I think, right? And you've been in that position where you've been having a discussion with someone and they described your position. And so like, you're having an argument with a lover, right? And they're upset about something and you say, okay, but we have to deal with this other problem first. And then they say, well, you just say my feelings don't matter at all. Well, that's not fair. You didn't say that their feelings didn't matter at all. You were just saying that there's another priority at the moment and that their feelings would have to take a backseat to the other priority. Now, the first version is a straw man. They're presenting your position in a way that is unfair, right? And the image of the straw man is you want to fight someone, but you set up a straw man, very weak, very light, very easy to fight and take apart. And straw man fallacies are used a lot, unfortunately. But if you want to write a good paper, I want to recommend that you use the steel man method. And the way the steel man works is that you describe your opponent's position in the strongest possible way, offering the best evidence you can, so that by the time your opponent has heard what you said, they not only think that you have described their position fairly and have offered a fair amount of evidence for it, but they think, okay, you have heard what I have to say. Now, why would you do this? If I want to convince you of A, why would I spend all this time making a strong argument for B? That doesn't make sense. Well, for an argumentation essay, it does. Because if you've offered the strongest possible case, the steel man case for B, then what this means is you need to offer strong evidence for A. And so a good argumentation essay will have an introduction that guides the person in, the reader in, lays out the thesis, and then maybe a paragraph or 2 that lays out what the problem is. And then 1 or 2 or 5 or however many paragraphs it takes to lay out the strongest possible case for the opposition. Okay? Offering evidence, offering everything that the other side would throw out there to say, this is the case. Okay? Then, once you've done that and you've given a fair hearing to them, then you then say, however, this is wrong because my position is better and here's my position and why it is better. And then you offer your position and you offer evidence, whether it's, statistics or facts or quotes or whatever, you're going to offer evidence for this. And then once all that's done, then when you get to the conclusion, you've earned the right to not just restate your thesis, but to add, to sort of talk more broadly about the implications of it. By doing this, you will essentially compel yourself to have a strong thesis statement because, first of all, it's not just a fact because there's at least 2 sides, if not more to it, and you've laid out strong evidence for one of the sides, right? And it's not just an opinion because if it were just an opinion, you couldn't offer evidence for both sides. No, instead, by offering the strongest possible version of the other side and then showing how your side is even stronger than that, this allows you to make sure that your thesis is a valid and strong argument and that your evidence is the evidence that we should be listening to because it is the more convincing evidence. And of course, if you're writing the paper, and midway through you realize you're more convinced by the other argument than your own, then switch sides to the right side, the correct side. It's about being correct in academic writing. If you use the Steelman method to develop your argumentation essay, your professor or your teacher will be pleased, or if you're writing for a professional context, your client will be pleased, or your colleague will be pleased, or your boss will be pleased. Everyone on the other side will feel like, yes, you gave their side a fair hearing, and you might just persuade some people that you were right all along.